A month ago, I was sentenced to life imprisonment. Here's the thing. My name is Miranda Dora, and I was adopted by the Dora family when I was 8 years old after my parents died. My adoptive father and adoptive mother are not particularly kind, but they have not treated me badly in terms of food, drink, shelter and transportation. In this way, I lived to the age of 18 with a little love. Since I am not the daughter of my adoptive parents, I did not crave a grand, warm, luxurious rite of passage. But, little did I know that I would be sentenced to life imprisonment to marry Stan Walton. To be precise, it was to curry favor with Stan Walton and get him to relentlessly invest in Dora's family. But who is Stan Walton? The port city kills the decisive business tycoons. But this man's whereabouts are unpredictable. He is very low-key, and legend has it that he does not like women. In short, people who approach Stan Walton with a purpose will not end well. I still remember being shocked, dazed, and incredulous, and I shuddered and asked, why? The adoptive mother changed her old smiling face, dusted off her cuffs, and said disdainfully, do you really think you are my daughter? Yes, I'm not biological. I forgot to mention that her sister Mignon Dora is her own daughter. How can you not repay the favor of others? So, I was packed with a suitcase and taken to Stan Walton's villa by my adoptive mother. The house is very large. The interior is darkly decorated. Standing on the balcony and looking at the foot of the mountain, the waves crashing on the boulders, it is a little eerie, as if to say that human beings are small, and as if to say, Miranda Dora, your future will never see the light of day. Thinking of this, I subconsciously took a half step back. There was a stab. I looked back and followed the source of the sound, and there was a man on the balcony on the second floor. Is not very old, has mixed race facial features, and his face is pale at the moment, making it impossible to guess what he is thinking at the moment. In the middle of the night, he walked down step by step, sat on the sofa, held a cigarette in one hand, and knocked on the table rhythmically with the other. What's it called? Hearing this, I pursed my lips. Miranda Dora. He nodded, and added, afraid of me. The tone is very flat, but there is an inexplicable sense of oppression. I swallowed and shook my head in denial. Who knows? He extinguished the cigarette butt and said lazily, be a wife or a sister. This sentence is like a hemp rope around the neck. If the answer is not good, it is good to turn left when you go out, but you will. As the minutes ticked by, my fingers were about to twist my skirt, and I took a deep breath and whispered, wife. As soon as these words came out, he tapped his fingertips, and then got up and walked towards me. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps. The distance is getting closer. He is a hungry wolf, who holds the power of life and death, and I am a lamb to the slaughter. Instinctively, I took a half step back. However, he moved very quickly, grabbed my chin, leaned over and whispered, you know I'm Stan Walton. I was stunned, met his dark eyes for 2 seconds, and nodded. Seeing this, he rubbed his thumb against the delicate skin, and finally he sneered and lowered his eyes. I don't have that fetish. Stan Walton does what he says. Instead of treating me as his wife, he waved his hand and asked the housekeeper to take me to the guest room for a night. I heard from the housekeeper that Stan Walton felt that Dora's family was not a human being, and all cats and dogs were delivered to the door. I'm happy, though, although I don't understand where happiness comes from. I repay the kindness of Dora's family, and I don't have to sell myself for glory, which is a very rewarding temptation. So, I fell into a deep sleep, not noticing that the door was open and closed. The next day, I packed my bags again and prepared to say goodbye to the butler, and leave to fend for myself. In this peaceful and prosperous era, I believe that if you have hands and feet, you will definitely be able to eat with a mouthful of food. And as for tuition fees, there will be no great pressure to work and study part-time. However, when I walked into the living room, I saw Stan Walton dusting his cigarette with one hand and holding his phone in the other, saying something I didn't understand. I wanted to walk past him to the door, but Stan Walton turned around, looked at him for a few seconds, tilted his head, and motioned for me to sit down. I was stunned. This is the truth. It is indeed not polite not to say goodbye to the host's family. Stan Walton quickly ended the call, looked at me a few times, and said in a deep voice, where, hey, Oh, I came back to my senses, and said what I had been thinking about all night. Stan Walton, sorry to interrupt. Since you didn't mean that, I'll go first. After saying that, I only felt that my face was hot, and it was the first time that I was so bold and said, such a failed self-recommendation pillow seat. Really? Stan Walton paused, looked at me for a few seconds, and then said, York, Dora said you were mine. Belch. That's right, but didn't he refuse? I blinked, puzzled. The next moment, he reached out and flicked my forehead, and said coldly, You are not ashamed. Did you go to college? Do you want to be a wife? Suddenly, my eyes widened and I was about to speak. He knocked on the table. It just so happens that I don't have anyone living here, so you can be my sister. I nodded. After a few seconds, I reacted with a shocked face, and saw him nod silently. At this moment I only had one thought, God, is this legendary boss a change? But I have to say that there are still some benefits to being Stan Walton's sister. The first is not to worry about food, drink, housing and transportation. The second is not to worry about tuition and living expenses. And the third is not afraid of being woken up late at night. However, there are two sides to everything. There are many benefits, but there are also many disadvantages. For example, at this moment, the circle of princelings around Stan Walton gathered at home to drink and relax. Stan Walton sat in the main seat, his expression relaxed, as if amused by what his buddy said. Of course, this kind of joy and excitement does not belong to me. Looking at the ice cubes in the tray, I sighed. Why do you want to have dinner on the day of the housekeeper's vacation? Brother, the ice cubes you want. I put the tray on the table, didn't look at the people present, and wanted to turn around and leave. Stan Walton grabbed my wrist and said lightly, Sit down. As soon as the words fell, the rest of the room looked at each other, and it was only after a while that someone said, Stan Walton, where did you come from? The tone hides a vague banter and ridicule. I stiffened, withdrew my hand from Stan Walton's hand with all my strength, then got up and looked at Stan Walton, and then at the others, and returned to my room in silence, probably saying that I didn't know how to measure and didn't have the eyesight. And since that day, Stan Walton hasn't been back. But he didn't know if it was revenge, or he felt that my little family was too angry to be on the stage. So he hired a lot of personal trainers for me. Golf, horseback riding, martial arts, swimming, yoga. I can't say no. I can only bite the bullet and take lessons. On the eve of the start of school, the moment I sent the yoga teacher out of the door, I was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. Do rich people fight like this? I didn't quite understand, so I washed up and fell asleep, half asleep and half awake. I only felt thirsty and uncomfortable, but the moment my consciousness slowly returned, my heart suddenly beat like a drum. There is a nice and familiar sandalwood fragrance, with a hint of wine in the nose. It's Stan Walton. How did he get back? Heartbeat pounding, I pretended to be asleep and rolled over, my back to him, trying to relax. However, in the next moment, his neck was wrapped in a big palm, and Stan Walton only had to squeeze it hard, and I would be fine after a few seconds. He let go again, and closed the door without saying a word, until the crunch came and I opened my eyes, and gasped for air. It's dangerous. I almost died. But what exactly is Stan Walton going to do? I've been pondering this question for months, but I haven't been able to answer it for a long time. One is that he either flies abroad or goes to the mainland, and the other is that I am busy with studies and many club activities, so I have no time to be distracted to think. Miranda Dora, the person who spoke, was a senior in the same department, and he patted me on the shoulder. Going to eat at a tea restaurant. The toast and pan-fried pork chop are superb. I nodded heavily. At the time of the meal, there were a lot of people in the tea restaurant, and the boss probably knew the senior, so he quickly packed up a table and came out. Eat it. When the food was served, I raised my hand to signal. The senior pursed his lips and smiled, and said while eating, Miranda Dora, do you want to climb the top of Taping Peak at night? Hearing this, I was stunned, and first hesitantly glanced at the person on the top of the phone. Since I became friends with him, the other party only has one sentence, go home on time. At this moment, probably because he didn't go home for many days, and probably wanted to see the beautiful night view, I turned my phone over and agreed. The port city is bustling. The night view is shocking. And there are many tourists. The senior probably came back and forth, and took me up to the observation deck with a familiar way. And the night breeze was cool, blowing away the heat but also bringing troubles. Miranda Dora. I hummed and politely waited for the senior to continue talking. I like you very much. When the words fell, I leaned back sharply and said, "What are you talking about?" As soon as the senior changed his appearance, he grabbed my hand with a big palm, and said righteously, "I'm serious. See you. The first time, I was deeply attracted to you. Be my girlfriend. Okay, let's be honest. I really didn't expect my senior to have this in mind about me. And besides, I didn't like him either." With my thoughts cleared, I pulled my hand back vigorously and said, "Senior, Before I finished speaking, my waist tightened and I slammed into the arms of the person behind me. I was about to struggle, but I heard a familiar voice, "She can't. It's Stan Walton." Suddenly, my body stiffened, and I didn't know what to do. But this scene fell in the eyes of the senior, and he was so angry that his chest bulged and asked, "Who are you?" Let go of Miranda Dora. However, in the next second, several fierce and sunglass bodyguards sprang out around the senior, and they all grabbed his shoulders. Instinctively, I grabbed Stan Walton's cuff and hurriedly stopped. "Brother, he's a good guy." When the words fell, I only felt that this small world was quiet. The hand on my waist was heavier, and the next moment I was holding my chin, and looking at each other. The corners of Stan Walton's mouth were slightly hooked, and he didn't look angry, so I pursed my lips and said softly, "Brother, don't embarrass you." When the words fell, Stan Walton didn't answer, grabbed my wrist with his big palm instead, and waved his hand as he turned to leave, signaling for someone to let go. As I stumbled forward, I looked back at my senior. At this moment, his face was dark, but a trace of surprise flashed in his eyes. "Senior," "Are you going to keep your distance from me?" Bang! The doors closed. The driver had the insight to raise the baffle, and I pressed against the door, not daring to look at Stan Walton. Somehow, he didn't kill me or scold me, but I still think he doesn't have a good temper. A person who can rise and fall in the business world and step on the white bones of his loved ones should not be a simple person. However, I was wrong. Ever since I got in the car, Stan Walton hadn't even looked at me, rubbing the corners of his eyes as he replied to messages or answered the phone. But he was so busy. How did he know that I had gone to the top of Victoria Peak? Thinking of this, I stole a glance at him, but I didn't know that he happened to look at him too. 5 seconds passed. I turned my head and didn't speak until the car stopped in front of my house, and I stiffened my neck and got out of the car and went back to the house. "Wait." Stan Walton turned his neck and motioned for me to sit next to him. Belch. "Brother, the way you don't speak is really scary." I took a deep breath and sat down next to him with my hands clenched into fists, waiting for him to give me a knife. Did I ever say I would go home on time? I nodded. "Take my words as the wind in your ears." Still going hiking with a male classmate, I swallowed, lowered my eyes and didn't refute. After that, he didn't speak, but I knew he was looking at me. I don't know how long it took, until my neck stiffened, and he finally spoke. "Accompany me to a dinner party tomorrow." I looked up and said in surprise, "Me? Probably I was really stupid like this." He looked at me quietly for a long time, then looked down at the time, and then waved his hand and motioned for me to go back to my room to rest. All right, nothing else to do on the weekend anyway. However, the next day, after the makeup artist and gown artist came to the door, I realized that Stan Walton should have taken this dinner party very seriously. Otherwise, why did he invite people to come here so much? However, rich people do enjoy it. I didn't feel a trace of irritability during the whole process, but I felt drowsy. Suddenly, the door opened from the outside. Stan Walton walked in, and when he saw me, he stopped, looked from top to bottom, and then he came up and said, "Take me by the hand." Oh, on the way, I couldn't get a word out of his mouth, until I got out of the car and grabbed his hand. What if I get into trouble later? Hearing this, he chuckled. For the first time, I saw this relaxation on his face, and it was like, "What are you talking about?" He rubbed my thumb against my mouth and said in a deep voice, "What are you afraid of?" I'll take care of it for you. This is a prophecy. The dinner party was of a very high level, with dignitaries, popular stars, and familiar people, Dora's parents and daughter. As soon as Stan Walton entered, someone called out and told me to sit down in the coffee break and get something to eat. But as soon as the others walked away, Dora's family arrived. Miranda Dora. The adoptive parents smiled, their faces unabashedly profound. Stan Walton is very good to you, I said. Mignon Dora rolled his eyes and said in an unusually cold tone, what are you proud of? Soon you'll be kicked out. I was stunned, not quite understanding what she was saying. Immediately afterwards, the adoptive parents took turns to complain to me, saying that the situation at home was not good, that the company's business line had been cut several times, and that the flow of funds was cut off. After listening to it, I concluded, I want money, I want resources, I want connections, and I want to steal secrets. Pity, I'm not going to get involved. Seeing that my face was pale, my adoptive mother was anxious, and immediately pushed me, and said angrily, stinky girl, who raised you? You white-eyed wolf who can't be raised. You deserve your dad to die early. Then, Mignon Dora also muttered, complaining, do you really think you fly on a branch and become a phoenix? Stan Walton, if you get married, you're thrown out of the door in minutes. The two of them were loud, and suddenly cast several inexplicable glances around. I subconsciously took a half step back, and was about to open my mouth to refute, when the next moment, a palm was placed on my shoulder, strong and powerful. She won't have this day. The whole hall also fell silent, and there was a dull and dead atmosphere of wind and rain coming. But I didn't stop seeing surprise, confusion, scrutiny, and, in the eyes of others, it's incredible, as if to say, interesting, when did my business become a talking point? The tone was very light, but I knew it, the Dora family knew it, and the rest of the scene knew that Stan Walton was in a bad mood, and there was a substantialist anger all over his body that could force people to lower their heads and eyes. There was a moment of silence. Mr. Dora was the first to break the condensation and apologized. I'm sorry, Stan Walton, I didn't take care of it. If you can't teach it, you will die. Mr. Dora choked. His face darkened, as if he didn't expect Stan Walton to be so faceless. And only after a while did he say, there won't be another situation like this. Immediately afterward, he dragged Mrs. Dora with one hand and Mignon Dora with the other to the side hall. As for me, my fingers rubbed and I stared at the man by the window without blinking. Miranda Dora. I hummed and watched in bewilderment as the man extinguished his cigarette butt and walked over step by step. Do you have a temper? You can't scold just eating with a mouth. Don't you dare to say it if you feel uncomfortable. For some reason, after a few seconds of meeting his eyes, my chest seemed to be blocked in one breath, and I couldn't help but feel heat in my eyes, and after a while, tears fell down in big drops. All I could hear was my sobs in the huge suite. Stan Walton, you. I lowered my head, avoided his complicated gaze, and sobbed. No, it's just what? Afraid that I'll go back on my word. I'm afraid I didn't cover you. The truth was exposed, and my face was a little hot for a while, and I didn't dare to say a word for a long time. At that moment, Stan Walton sighed, then pinched my chin, looked at me, and said slowly, what do you call me? I was puzzled, but I answered honestly, brother. He nodded and said, brother protects sister, can't you? And what do they want you to steal from me? Thump, thump. My heart was almost breaking through the epidermis at this moment, and I looked at him in amazement, and only after a few seconds did I whisper, the plan for the Grand Pier. Dora's family seems to be beautiful on the surface, but in fact, it is full of debts inside, especially Mr. Dora's private gambling and Mrs. Dora Mignon Dora's profligacy. This family may not last long, therefore, the Dora family will disregard their face at the banquet and try to get the slightest possibility of saving the Dora family. Of course, I wasn't kicked out of the house by Stan Walton, and that gave them hope. In particular, he is holding the big project, Ganghuayo Terminal Plan, in hand, which is related to the next market changes and supporting products. Thinking of this, the corners of my mouth drooped and I didn't say a word more. Stupid. Stan Walton rubbed my head like a dog. For a project of this size, bidding is the same. But, He paused. His dark eyes seemed to flash a hint of darkness, and after a while, he smiled meaninglessly. If you want, take it, Miranda Dora. You didn't raise this kid for nothing, Mr. Doramers. Dora smiled at each other, then pointed to the 2 urns in the corner, and smiled. Oh, take it, then, Mr. Dora strode out, and Mrs. Dora brushed the broken hair on her forehead and walked slowly upstairs. Painted wooden lacquer box. I lifted the corner of my jacket to wipe the dust off the surface, and after a few seconds I said, Mom and Dad, let's go home. As soon as he turned around, Mignon Dora appeared out of nowhere and said gloomily, I'm quite capable, but I really climbed Stan Walton. After saying that, she glanced around from head to toe again, and snorted, I just don't know if the Walton family can let you in. I frowned. What do you want to say? I heard that Stan Walton's fiancée is coming home. Do you think she'll let you stay there? It's none of your business. I didn't pay attention to her anymore, and I was about to raise my feet to walk, but in the next moment, my feet were lifted, and the whole person pounced forward. Bang! The urn was thrown out, and finally it was thrown heavily on the grass, and at that moment a gust of wind blew, and some of the ashes inside were blown away by the wind, and some were sprinkled on the grass. Ignoring the bruising on my wrist, I crawled forward tremblingly, trying to retrieve the box with my hand, but in the next second, the servant brought a water hose, and washed away all traces. Miranda Dora, you don't want to live a good life. People like you deserve to die. Your parents are, and so are you, is it? Not really. Out of nowhere, I grabbed Mignon Dora's hair and opened my mouth to bite her neck, hoping to tear off a piece of skin. Name, Miranda Dora. Family. Answer. The policeman's voice suddenly became louder, and I subconsciously closed my eyes and blurted out, Stan Walton. This sentence directly controlled the police for 3 seconds. I saw him staring coldly, and after a while, he said, be honest. Wait for someone to come. I glanced at Mignon Dora, who was staring at Mignon Dora, with messy hair and a red neck, and after a few seconds, I withdrew my gaze and looked down in contemplation, not knowing what he would think. I don't know how long it took for the door of the inquiry room to open from the outside. When I looked up, it was Stan Walton. His face was extremely dark, and his forehead was a little messy, and he had a sense of déjà vu coming from the meeting in a hurry. Scared. The man's voice was low, and his tone didn't fluctuate, but it sounded like accountability. My heart trembled, and I didn't know what to say for a moment. The next moment, Stan Walton reached out to support my chin, turned left and right, and after a few seconds, retracted his hand and tilted his head at the lawyer behind him. The car drove straight to the villa. I swallowed my saliva, and secretly looked at the man next to me. Stan Walton leaned back in his chair lazily, his eyelids too lazy to lift, and with a cigarette in his left hand. He didn't light or smoke, but kept calling and replying messages, neither asking nor scolding about today's events. He finally put down his phone, pinched the bridge of his nose with his fingertips, and said slowly, tomorrow I will have more martial arts lessons. Hearing this, I was slightly stunned, and looked at him puzzled. Next time, we'll win. You didn't lose. Okay. That's what I thought, and that's what I said. Unexpectedly, Stan Walton sneered, raised his eyebrows, and said, then what's the matter with your hand? Following his words, I suddenly exhaled a cloudy breath and said in a muffled voice, it was an accident. But whether it's an accident or too weak, no one can stop Stan Walton's decision. It's just that from this day on, the frequency of his appearances at home has increased. I take martial arts classes and he's watching. I was in a yoga class and he was watching. I play golf and he's watching. I went to practice the piano and he was listening. Is the big guy so idle? Of course. I didn't dare to ask this sentence. After saying goodbye to the teacher, Stan Walton came back, motioned for me to sit aside, handed me a stack of papers, and said calmly, about your parents. I was stunned, then turned over and flipped a few pages, and the next moment I met his extremely dark eyes and said slowly, thank you. He didn't react, and touched my head before going upstairs. Look carefully. Come to me if you want to cry. Stan Walton said it. There is a lot of information in the documents. One is the compensation paid by Mignon Dora for the injury, and the other is the real cause of death of my biological parents, who was hit and killed by Mrs. Dora's younger brother while drunk. And Mrs. Dora was forced to adopt me because he was afraid of the East Window incident. It turns out that it is. So it is. At this moment, everything that has been unfigured out for many years has an answer. The complexity in Mr. Dora's eyes, the disdain in Mrs. Dora's eyes, and the contempt in Mignon Dora's eyes seem to say, look, the truth is something to be trampled into the mud in front of the class elite. Tick-tock. Tears fell down in large numbers, and vision gradually blurred. Suddenly, a low sigh came from overhead. Don't be afraid. Hug. These were the last 2 words I heard before I cried until I lost consciousness. When I woke up, I saw a dark room, and I was stunned and sat up slowly. But unexpectedly, a sentence came from behind him. Awake. I looked back and saw Stan Walton standing against the window, and I don't know how long. He looked at me fixedly, then walked over, bent down and pinched my chin, observed for a few seconds, and then said, it's good to cry. With that, he walked out. What do you mean? Too much to cry. Suddenly, this scene flashed before my eyes. After Stan Walton said, hug, I threw myself into his arms and cried, as if I wanted to cry out all these grievances. At first, his body was stiff and he didn't know how to place his hands. Gradually, as I his shirt with tears, Stan Walton stiffened. It took him a while before he sighed, put one hand around my waist, and the other on the back of my head, and said, good, don't be afraid. I don't remember much about what happened after that, except that Stan Walton's tone was gentle, calm and unprecedented, and I remember putting my arms around his waist, and trying to treat him as my only driftwood in the water. Get up, come with me. I didn't dare to ask what it was. After all, it was taking Stan Walton's bed. Either I was sleepwalking, or I was crying so much that Stan Walton couldn't tear my hand off. Of course, I'm leaning towards the former. After all, who is Stan Walton? It's the big guy. Who am I? A sister who has no relatives and no reason but interests. Thinking about this, my mood suddenly became depressed, and maybe it was time for me to leave. Dora family villa. Mr. Dora knelt on the ground. Mrs. Dora was tied with a thick rope and a towel in his mouth. And as for Mignon Dora, the whole person seemed to be stupid, and sat on the ground in a daze. The large living room was full of bodyguards, and Stan Walton turned his neck, first at Dora's family, then at me, and then patted the couch beside him, and motioned for me to sit down. The moment he sat down, he tilted his head, and the next moment the bodyguard kicked Mr. Dora. Stan Walton, spare me, it's my ghost. Seeing Stan Walton's expressionless face, Mr. Dora turned his head and looked at me crying, Miranda Dora, tell Stan Walton that we did something wrong and that we shouldn't have taken the proposal. After 5 minutes of crying and crying, I finally came up with one thing. The proposal was deliberately arranged by Stan Walton. Thinking of this, I looked up at Stan Walton, only to know that he also happened to look at it, and his eyes were dark. After a moment, Stan Walton was a little impatient and snorted, and the bodyguard expertly shoved the towel into York Dora's mouth. And then it was Mrs. Dora's turn. Miranda Dora, yes, I'm sorry, I was wrong. For the sake of so many years of nurturing, you can let me go. I was wrong, I shouldn't have covered. I took a deep breath and avoided Stan Walton's scrutinizing gaze in favor of Mrs. Dora's pitiful, but cruel look. Impossible. I hope you will have a miserable life for the rest of your life. I didn't pay attention to anyone, but instead bowed my head and intertwined my fingers, as if I was cold and ruthless. Stan Walton waved his hand, and the bodyguard escorted Mignon Dora. Miranda Dora, do you think you've won? She laughed a few times. A hint of viciousness flashed in her eyes, and then looked at Stan Walton. Without use, you will only be abandoned by him. It's strange that I was worried about hearing something like, I'm being kicked out of Walton's house, before I came here. But at this moment, I couldn't be more relaxed. After all, I did approach Stan Walton with a purpose. Leave. Just get everything back on track. When the Dora family was taken away by the police, I breathed a sigh of relief, tilted my head to look at Stan Walton, smiled a moment later and said, thank you, brother. Whether it was before or now, I owe you a word of thanks. However, as soon as these words came out, Stan Walton first frowned at me a few times, and then reached out his hand, bring me my phone. Subconsciously, I took a step back and looked at him with some puzzlement. I taught you. Why don't you sue me when you're scolded? How would he know? Before I could figure it out, Stan Walton reached out and pulled his phone out of my pocket, and his bony fingers slid back to me with a few clicks. One more class tomorrow. Probably because I was too surprised. Stan Walton sighed. You can't learn the complaint, so let the kindergarten teacher teach you. This sentence forced me for half a minute, distinguishing the smile in Stan Walton's eyes. My shoulders slumped, and I resigned myself to my fate and protested. Brother, you come with me. This is Dora's kennel. I've lived here for 3 years, when I was just adopted, and Mignon Dora doesn't like me very much. This is my secret base, and the basement is dark, but I don't have to look at Mrs. Dora's face here. Brother, this is my coming-of-age gift, a gift from my classmates. It's not a complaint, but it's more about the fact that Stan Walton realizes at this moment that there is a huge difference between me and his life situation, and that being his sister is a godsend. I don't know how long it took, but I took the glass from Stan Walton and drank it down. Brother, let's go back. Stan Walton didn't respond, but his face was darker than ever, and he had a violent air of, don't be beaten by Lao Tzu. However, he didn't say anything, put his arm on my shoulder and went home. From that day on, Stan Walton was busy again. As for me, I was filled with classes every day, and I only found out about the fate of Dora's family on TV in my spare time. Imprisonment, indefinite, go belly up. I knew exactly who it was, so I sent him a thank you, and didn't talk about anything else. After all, there is also such a piece of news on TV. Stan Walton, something is coming. Go to the deep water bay with the goddess to love the nest. Stan Walton is in a high position, and there are many people who flock to him, especially since he ate the assets of the Dora family. I reasonably surmised that I had no value left. With that in mind, I rubbed my finger and sent him a message a few seconds later. Brother, are you back tonight? The person on the other end was also playing with his mobile phone, and he replied in seconds. Reply. Keep it short and to the point. This is the style of Stan Walton. I extinguished my phone, exhaled a deep breath of turbidity, and silently thought in my heart, good gathering, good dispersion. Two do not owe each other. Stan Walton came back sooner than I expected. At this point, I was serving the bowl to the table, and Stan Walton was already sitting on the side, watching my movements for a moment. Not full. Shame. I paused and handed him the chopsticks as if nothing had happened. But as soon as I sat down, I got up and took a bottle of red wine, and poured him a glass and poured myself a glass. Bang! With the crisp clinking of glasses, I took a big sip without the inexplicable look from Stan Walton, slightly astringent, just like mine. In the next moment, Stan Walton drank it all, took my cup away, and said lazily, something to say, note that not a doubt, but a certainty. Hearing this, I pursed my lips, first said, and then smiled. Brother, congratulations. He clasped his arms in his hands and did not respond. I heard you're getting married. Congratulations. I only felt that his eyes seemed to be warm, burning my face inch by inch. Brother, thank you for taking care of me during this time. Stan Walton finally smiled, and asked in a deep voice, you're leaving? I let out an and explained, there's a lot of school curriculum, and I can live in the school so you don't have to. Avoided me and was forced to live elsewhere. But for some reason, Stan Walton seemed to be able to see through my heart, frowning and asking, you think I'm not going home because I think you're in the way? I didn't say that. At this moment, Stan Walton really laughed, and he put his hands on the table. You're drunk. If your mind is not clear, go and sleep first. Yes. Oh, I nodded. Probably yes. Otherwise I was a little out of breath at this moment, as if I felt like I was a fish that couldn't breathe without Stan Walton. Half asleep and half awake, I seemed to hear a sigh, so stupid. Immediately afterward, there was a warm hair on his forehead, which was fleeting, unlike before. When I woke up, I had one more thing in my hand. Bracelet, emerald green, very good color. I sat up, rubbed it for a moment, and then placed it on the head of the bed, only to see the note that Stan Walton had left for me. Wake up and find me. Plop plop. With my heart beating like a drum, I couldn't guess what Stan Walton was going to say, but the unknown prediction was the most terrifying. But the moment I turned on my phone, a message popped up again. Stan Walton is in the same frame with the goddess. Good things are coming. The man is handsome, and the woman is beautiful. My fingers trembled. I cut off the page, and clicked on the pinned friend. Few conversations. From the very beginning. I don't know how long it took. I smiled and sent him a message. Goodbye, brother. Then delete the friend. Pack up and leave. Unexpectedly, the moment I opened the door, Stan Walton returned. His pupils were dark, but I couldn't see any of his emotions. I swallowed and asked, Brother, why did you get back? Hearing this, he leaned over slightly, clasped my shoulder with one hand, and said coldly for the first time, You want to leave so much. I didn't understand why he was so angry, but I nodded honestly. The next moment, I was held in front of the floor-to-ceiling window by Stan Walton. The man's scorching and muscular body leaned in, and at the same time, a word came from the top of his head, as if he was gritting his teeth. Do you really think of yourself as a sister? My heart trembled, my mind went blank, and I instinctively replied, yes. In the next second, Stan Walton's face quickly enlarged in front of me, and then there was a pop. I, surprised, no conscience, just go. Do you really think of me as a kind person? Didn't you say you wanted to be my wife? Well, say one thing and do another. Forgot you stole my family heirloom. Wait a minute. The jade bracelet is an heirloom. I swallowed, reacted and pushed his hand, but unexpectedly he was restrained and brought my hand to his waist instead. Miranda Dora, let's go get the certificate. Hey. It wasn't until a thin marriage certificate was placed in the palm of my hand that surprise swept over me, and I grabbed Stan Walton's hand and muttered, Brother, you, Stan Walton. If you have to call your brother, it's not impossible. I ignored his words, but looked at his face seriously, trying to find a loophole. However, after a long time, he just raised his eyebrows and smiled at me, and his smile was frank and open, just to prove that he was not lying, and he was not taking advantage of me. Turn back the clock to a day ago. Stan Walton took me by the hand and walked to the living room, and he called the goddess Jenny Suri, who was known as Stan Walton's sweetheart goddess in the Hong Kong media. I don't know how many times I told others the true relationship between the two. Jenny Suri said angrily, one has my father's surname, and the other has my mother's surname. Sister and brother, it's really a big oolong. I smiled at Stan Walton's funny eyes, and I couldn't say a word for a long time. But before Jenny Suri left, she tapped me on the shoulder and whispered, Go to the room at the end of the 3rd floor. You've got the answers. With that, she made an excuse to take Stan Walton away. The huge villa suddenly fell silent, catching a glimpse of the tilted-head vehicle driving away from the yard. I took a deep breath and followed Jenny Suri's words into the room at the end. The next second, the phone slipped out of my hand and fell heavily to the ground. Immediately after, I swallowed my saliva and walked in slowly, and my eyes were filled with dense drawing paper. Different sizes, but unified. The painting is all about me. Sleeping, eating, going to class, playing ball, dressing, pajamas, crying, laughing. At this moment, it is difficult for me to describe the mood at this time. I just feel that my chest is blocked by something, and it is difficult to breathe. Are you scared? At some point, Stan Walton returned. A pair of large palms reached out from my back, then clamped tightly, and then Stan Walton rested his chin on top of my head, and said in a strange tone, I'm afraid I'm useless. Baby, marry me. Hearing this, my body stiffened, and I didn't know how to react. But who is Stan Walton? He can dominate the business world, naturally understands human nature very well, and also understands people's hearts. He rubbed my face, and said in a dumb voice, I know, you like me too. Stan Walton interrupted me and whispered, I pretended to sleepwalk and came to kiss me repeatedly, and I really thought I didn't find out. Baby, I like you very much. Marry me, okay? For a long, long time, until my legs were a little numb, I heard myself say, okay, extra. Stan Walton's perspective. York Dora is stupid enough, and Miranda Dora isn't too smart. One for money, one for gratitude. Tut, I can't say how it felt, but for the first time, I didn't have the idea of throwing people out. It's just that when I asked her if she wanted to be a wife or a sister, the child was obviously nervous, but she still said wife. Speechless. I'm not a beast. I don't bother to tell her, and take her as my sister, which is the most conscientious thing I have ever done in the past 28 years. Miranda Dora is annoying. Look at me when eating. Look at me when you sit. Peek at me when you read. Doesn't this kid know that it will be obvious that his head is so crooked? That's it. But I didn't expect her to be so energetic. After drinking too much about cooperation, I turned my neck and was about to go back to the room. But the next moment I was speechless. What happened to the living creature on the bed? Piglets are sleeping like piglets. Bother. For the first time, I thought I was too used to it. The little kid hugged me, but I don't think it's right. Use me as a pillow. And also, I woke up and didn't admit it. What's going on? I asked someone, and it was sleepwalking. Gotta get it. My friend said I found an ancestor. But who is this ancestor? It's obviously a big problem. But, when I was drunk, she was quite discerning and served me hangover soup. Never mind, it doesn't cost a few bucks to raise an extra person. It's just that the child learns badly. The bodyguard said she didn't get home on time, and I suspended the meeting and clicked on the location software while asking people to drive. Victoria Peak. With whom? I can't describe the emotions at this moment. I was going to get rid of this burden, but when I saw the child standing with the man, I only felt a nameless fire surging in my chest. But seeing the surprise in her eyes, my emotions cooled down again, and for the first time I had a thought in my heart, no one is worthy of her. But in the next second, I was also stunned by the thought. However, I adhered to the principle of, out of sight and out of mind, and traveled frequently. But this really made me laugh. And this kid didn't even take the initiative to send me a message. But I didn't expect that the child was still a gas bag. The vampires of Dora's family have come to the door, and she is still submissive. How did she develop this temper? I couldn't figure it out, so I had to solve her problems while enrolling her in classes. Say more swearing. This is what I ask of all teachers. There's nothing you can't learn. Pity. Miranda Dora is really kind and easy to get upset. The first time she threw herself into my arms and cried, I was a little helpless. But the only thing I knew for sure was that I was in pain all over my body, and I wanted to cut the Dora family with 1,000 knives. However, it's a good thing that she can cry, at least with me. She is safe and has no scruples, especially when I was sleeping with her in my arms. She was fully dependent, and I slowly exhaled a cloudy breath. Stan Walton. You're done. It's just that after Miranda Dora cried, the memories disappeared. She doesn't remember what she did to me. Good gas. Scumbag. But when she hooked her lips and smiled sweetly, I was so choked that I couldn't speak. That's it. It's good if she's happy. It's just that I didn't expect that she was very sharp, and when I released some signs, she immediately ran away. What about playing? I thought I was too blatant, and I thought that she was 10 years old, and she was still young, so she had to take her time. Thinking back to her weak and boneless waist, when she was attached, my Adam's apple slid down. Is it small? It's not small. You can get married. But when the Hong Kong media spread rumors, the child actually sent me a farewell message. It's speechless. Jen raised a white-eyed pig. Thankfully, I was able to get back in time. My face turned cold, and I watched her pretend to be calm as she cooked noodles and drank wine, as usual. But when she put her arms around my neck and poof, I lowered my eyes and stared at her long eyelashes, like a butterfly about to fly. Little liar. Kissed to pretend to be drunk. Really, when she woke up, she had to collect her luggage and leave. And I was speechless. And for the first time I felt that those reporters were all going to be laid off and re-employed. She likes me, though. Hey, calling Jenny Suri home. Her eyes teased, as if to say, I finally can't help it. I wanted to kick her out, but when I turned my head to look at the stunned little liar, I held back again. The misunderstanding was cleared up in a few words. I was about to say a few words to the little liar, but Jenny Suri was more annoyed than she and told me to take her down the mountain. That's it. Give her a moment to think. But I didn't expect Jenny Suri to tell her my secret. When I rushed home, she opened the door and saw the darkest side of me. Like a voyeur, he drew all the different sides of her. Of course, Miranda Dora never knew that it was these paintings that accompanied me the most enjoyable times when my whole body was tense, and I couldn't stop talking. However, she found out and found out. After all, from this moment I decided, I, Stan Walton, am marrying Miranda Dora. The end.